My name is Aaron Pina, and I'm the chair of the Board on Representation, Accessibility, Inclusion, and Diversity for the AMS. I'm happy to see many familiar names in the participants list, as well as a number of new names. So just a little bit of, I guess, an overview. We're going to have the first hour is going to be more along the lines of the panel discussion, and then the last 30 minutes will be we'll have more networking breakout type sessions. So please stick around for that if you're able. So the Board of Representation, Accessibility, Inclusion, and Diversity, or BRAID, we are a community within the AMS for all underrepresented groups, including we have AMS Women, we have the Committee on Hispanic and Latinx Advancement, we have LGBT, we deal with accessibility issues throughout the AMS, and we really serve as a community to the broader American Meteorological Society. So if there are any questions before I pass this over, of course, everybody on here is for the LGBT, which our committee is called Coriolis. So first off, I guess I didn't say Happy Pride, everyone. But if you have any questions in terms of the 30,000 foot view in terms of what the AMS is doing, suggestions on what we can do better, or would like to join our efforts, please reach out to me and or Gage and the BRAID Coriolis Committee. So thanks everyone, and enjoy the webinar. Thank you, and I'll pass this on to Gage.
Thanks, Aaron. As Aaron mentioned, my name is Gage Kerr. I'm the chair of this Coriolis committee. I know Coriolis has been thrown around a couple times now, and I'm guessing that most of us have heard of the Coriolis force in regards to deflection and apparent motion in the fluid atmosphere or ocean. But when we use Coriolis in this context, we're referring to this LGBTQ committee that is part of AMS BRAID. Coriolis has been around for quite a while. It began 12 years ago. And since that first Coriolis event at the AMS annual meeting 12 years ago, we've held a Coriolis reception every year at the annual meeting for the LGBTQ community and also allies. At the time that Coriolis was started, and even until more recently, it was pretty rare for a professional geoscience society to have these society-sanctioned public events. A lot of times, there were kind of affinity groups, but they operated more underground. So we're grateful that we have this rich legacy to build on. The event that you're attending today, this webinar, is exciting because it's the first Coriolis event that's being held outside the confines of the annual meeting. And as we look to the future, we're hoping to be able to put on more events like this throughout the year. So that said, if anyone on this call is interested in getting involved, kind of like Aaron mentioned, please get in touch with me or Aaron. In the early years of Coriolis, we are really grateful to have received financial backing from UCAR SOARS program. And since that time, we've gotten a variety of donations from companies, universities, departments, etc. So I bring this up today because as we're looking to the 2022 AMS meeting in Houston, we're starting to think about what that reception is going to look like and our fundraising efforts. So if any of you on the call maybe hold the purse strings to your department or company's budgets and would like to support us in this regard, please get in touch with Aaron or me and we can discuss sponsorship and some of the ways that we try to make this beneficial for you as well as for us. So I want to draw all of your attention briefly to the AMS Code on Conduct. I will try to go back to that slide if I can. There we go. I'm not going to read it for the sake of time today, but I think you all know that this environment is supposed to be fun and a learning environment, but we also want it to be an environment where people are respected, are not discriminated against, or receive unwanted attention or advances. So that being said, if you encounter any of this behavior today, there is an email address there. I am kind of skeptical whether it's being monitored on a random Wednesday in the middle of summer. So if you encounter any of this behavior, please message Aaron and I in the Zoom chat and we will handle it. So before I pass things over to Mike Farah, the AMS president and moderator of our panel, I want to do a little bit of a fun icebreaker activity for all of us. I think you're going to hear LGBT and LGBTQ thrown around a lot today. And I'm guessing we all know that there's a lot of other letters that are often omitted, probably just to save a few breaths as we're talking about it. But I want to give us all a little bit of a quiz today and see how many of those sexual and gender identities we're all familiar with. So Jerry, if you could fire up our poll, I'll stop sharing my screen.
Sounds good. And I would just like to say LGB will probably be pretty easy. The answer choices are pretty easy, but let's see once we get to QIA and 2S. So I'm going to share now.
And no cheating, everyone. You can't go look up what these mean while he's loading the poll.
That's a good amount of people participating. I think we're about 33, so past half. It's great.
Should give folks another 10, 15 seconds and then check on the results. We'll see if there's any wiseacres among us who put lightning for an L or bicycle for B.
Yeah, there's definitely some split answers in number 8, a little bit of number 7 and 6 as well, and number 4.
Are you able to broadcast the results, Jerry, for everyone to see, or is that not a capability?
Let's hear. I can go ahead and broadcast through my screen. So give me 1 second, please. Everyone see that now? Besides me kayaking.
We can just see you kayaking, Jerry.
We just see you kayaking, right?
Huh. Let's see, I can't get it.
You must have 2 monitors. Or do you?
No, I just have one. Usually it. Okay, I will go. I can read through them.
Sure.
To save time. So number 1, L stands for lesbian, 100% in answers there. So everyone got that right. 2, G does stand for gay, 100% there as well. 3 is the B, and that stands for bisexual, 100%. T stands for transgender. We do have some folks that picked transsexual as an option. So there's a little bit of split there. It is transgender. What does the Q and LGBTQI2S stand for? Queer, 100%. I stands for intersex. We also had some answers in inclusion, but it does stand for intersex. A stands for asexual. And we did have some responses that said allies. And I know that Gage and Aaron, you had a feeling that there would be a couple people that would put allies, would choose allies. And then 2S stands for two-spirited. We've had answers all over the place, from straight and sexual fluid to sapiosexual. It does mean two-spirited from First Nation community. Let's see, I think that's all of them. Sorry, I couldn't get this to display. I apologize for that.
No worries. Well, thank you all for participating in that, and hopefully you either reinforced what you knew to be true or learned something new through this exercise. At this time, I'll pass things over to Mike. Before I do, I just want to say, please make sure if you're in the audience that your cameras and microphones are turned off, just to respect our speakers and panelists and conserve bandwidth. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gage. I'm Mike Farah, the 2021 president of the AMS, and it's my distinct honor and pleasure to be able to moderate today's session. I've had the opportunity to do a few of these through accessibility type workshops or webinars that were sponsored through the BRAID. This is my first one this year with the Coriolis group, and I'm so happy to be here with you all today. You didn't come to hear me talk. I'll be a good moderator and keep things flowing, but not talk too much. So I will kind of lay out kind of what we're going to do today, and then I'll turn it over to our first speaker. So you're going to hear from a real diverse group from the LGBTQ community who will kind of give you their perspectives on kind of the challenges that they faced, some personal stories that can really, I think, what you'll remember as you walk away, as well as some insights and ideas for not only looking back and how things have changed, but looking forward as well. And so we got multiple dimensions of diversity here, but I'll start with, I would say, the age or career stage diversity. So we're going to go from the early career to mid-career. Hopefully, I'm probably the only one in the late career. But I'll start with Tevin, and then we'll move on to Alex. So I'm going to let them do their own introductions. And they'll tell you a little bit about themselves and then provide some perspectives on specific areas that we've talked about beforehand. There'll be plenty of time at the end for Q&A and a panel discussion. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Tevin Wooten, my fellow Florida State Seminole alumni.
Hi, Mike. Thanks so much for the introduction. It's a joy to be here with everybody today. I'm glad that all 53 of you or 52 of you came out and participated with us here at Coriolis and BRAID. My name is Tevin Wooten. I am a meteorologist, an on-camera meteorologist with the Weather Channel. I am a member of the AMS's Culture and Inclusion Cabinet, and I also have my CBM seal from the AMS, seal number 869. And just as I start to give my introduction, my dog Radar decides to grab his squeaky toy. So I'll talk over that for just a bit. And if it gets distracting or annoying, just let me know. I come to this panel with a couple of different experiences. Of course, as Mike just mentioned, apologies. Give me just 1 second, guys. Sorry about that. As Mike mentioned, I'm a graduate from Florida State University, but I'm also a graduate of the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, Arkansas. That's in Northwest Arkansas for those of you that aren't familiar with the geography there. And I come at this with the intersect of not only being gay, but also being Black. And I think sometimes those are two perspectives or two intersects that aren't necessarily equated, though it can very easily be tied to a part of the LGBTQ movement. It's certainly one thing or one part that I feel like a lot of people are missing. So hopefully today I can answer some of your questions about what my life experiences have been like, and hopefully, we can all learn from that and grow from that. And really quickly, I will say that, yes, pets are welcome. Someone just put that in the chat. So they're welcome, but their toys are not. So, and with that, I will pass it off, I believe, to my other early career colleague, Alex, correct?
Yep. Hi, my name's Alex. They, them pronouns. I am in retail, but I did get my degree from the University of Missouri in meteorology back in 2019. Like I like to say, before COVID, like the last one I got like a regular graduation. But I come across the coming out through like college stage and then the job searching stage, and also still job searching, of course, within the meteorology field, and then the coming out and discovering yourself in college, and then the name change and the overall identity as like non-binary and the trans umbrella as well, along with pronouns. And who would be next?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have mentioned that earlier. So we'll be turning it over to Carolyn, my friend and former colleague from UCAR.
Hello, folks. Thank you for having me here. So my name is Carolyn Brinkworth. I currently work as the Chief Diversity Officer at UCAR. I'm responsible for both the strategic direction of the DEI work here and also that interpersonal level of making sure that people feel welcome and included and taken care of. My PhD is in astrophysics. I have an MA in education from Claremont Graduate University, where I wrote my thesis on ways to create more inclusive and welcoming environments for queer students, in STEM environments specifically. I came out as gay, queer when I was, I guess, early to mid 20s. So it was after I finished grad school and moved to the States, and that's when I came out. And then other than that, I identify as white, able-bodied, neurotypical. My gender identity is generally best described as I don't care. It genuinely feels pretty irrelevant to me. I think what is very critical to my mental health, though, is my gender expression. And so if my hair grows out or if I have to wear clothes that are in any way feminine, I get pretty bad dysphoria. So, I mean, like literally, I want to peel off my skin. And so it's really important that I honor my gender expression, but my gender identity is a bit of a non-entity, really. But yeah, the gender expression thing was tricky during COVID. You can imagine at the beginning when I couldn't see my stylist and my hair started to grow out, you know, I got pretty good at clippers pretty quickly. So that was a real challenge. Mike, I don't know who I'm throwing to next, but I will throw it back to you.
Thank you so much. And our last panelist today is Sim.
Hi, I'm Sim Aberson. I'm with the Hurricane Research Division at Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Laboratory, part of NOAA in Miami. I got my undergraduate and master's degree from Penn State and my PhD from the University of Maryland. I've been at AOML for a long time. This is my 41st year there, working in hurricane research. So it's been quite a while, and I've been out just about the whole time. When I was an undergraduate at Penn State, I was the co-chair of the LGBT, what is now called the LGBT group on campus. So I was pretty out, and everybody knew that I was gay when they hired me in the early 1980s. So I've been out for quite a long time. So I'll leave it at that right now.
Thank you, Sim. I'm going to ask all the panelists to come back onto camera. We're going to have a panel discussion, but we're going to take questions from you out in the virtual audience. But as those questions are coming in, I've got a couple to start us off and kind of get the panel discussion going. And so one is, we'll get into some specifics from your individual stories in a little bit, but let's just start off with kind of one of the common threads that brings us here together. We're all here in the AMS community. So you can feel free to draw from your own personal things that happened outside of AMS conferences or AMS meetings, but certainly, or your AMS environment as well. But based on your experience with the AMS and with other organizations, what do you feel the AMS does well, and where do you think there's room for improvement that you would, if you had put it on your top 2 or 3 list, what are the things that you think the AMS should strive to do a little better? So I can wait for a hand up, or I can be like the mean teacher and just pick on a student. All right, go Alex.
Okay.
I think from you. There you go.
Yep. Basically, one good thing is, as an AMS student volunteer, overall, like AMS handled like lodging well for me, along with like preferred name, pronouns, and even at the hotel, if you have to put down like your legal name, they were willing to work with that overall. The only thing I had challenges with is at the main conferences. Is I know in one of the places, I don't remember exactly which one it was in the last like 3 years, there was like mainly just the gender neutral bathrooms, family bathrooms mainly being at the main entrance instead of being like more spread out. So if you had to really don't want to go into a gendered bathroom, you would have to walk a further distance to that. But other than that, it's been pretty well. And then probably another thing I can think of is normalizing pronouns even in presentations. even if we could get like the leaders of like of each of the conferences to like normalize pronouns of everybody at the beginning of like a presentation for like that as well.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. Any other comments from the group?
I think for me, Mike, it's about not treating us all like a monolith. I mean, you know, as Tevin was saying earlier, we are a hugely diverse community within our own, you know, queer identities, and so making sure that we are covering all the things, you know, I mean, like I said at the beginning, I identify as white, able-bodied, neurotypical, and I have a 2-year-old, and I'm a single parent by choice. And so there's a lot of stuff that I, even though I have a lot of privilege in some areas, I can't do. Like traveling to an AMS meeting is really hard right now, especially when my parents can't come over and look after my 2-year-old because there's no travel due to COVID from the UK. So thinking about how we can support the queer community in all our diversity, rather than just focusing on queer, you know, I think would be absolutely huge. And I see Tevin nodding along there as well. I guess you probably have thoughts about that too. But yeah, I see a lot in the queer community, especially not only in the way that we're treated, but in the way that we interact ourselves, that really still prioritizes the needs of the majority identities or the dominant identities within the queer community. And so making sure that we are calling that out amongst our own community, as well as making sure that we are asking for what all of us need, not just what the people with dominant identities within our community need, I think is really important.
Thanks, Carolyn. So Sim or Tevin, do you have anything to add?
I was just going to add, and Carolyn sort of hit this one on the head in terms of being an advocate for all, because it's so very easy to get caught up in your own cause that sometimes even as queer folk or queer people, we don't necessarily look across the aisle and see, you know, what our buddies might need or what our friends might need or colleagues might need. And specifically within AMS, of course, I think in terms of recruiting, we could do a much better job at recruiting Black people of color that are queer as well, specifically as it pertains to LGBTQIA, but also that are that don't identify as LGBTQIA. So yeah.
Yeah, I went to my first AMS meeting in 1983, believe it or not. So just the fact that we're here and we have, you know, events at meetings and we can get together and easily identify each other is just sort of amazing to me. You know, that we've come this far during my lifetime. So that's really wonderful. I agree with Tevin, you know, just all, you know, minority groups that are not represented within the geosciences community and within the AMS, we need to do a better job of recruiting them and supporting them in their careers as we move forward.
Well, that's a good segue to the second question for that I'd like your thoughts on. And so there are probably a good variety of folks on this webinar, just like there would be hanging out at the Coriolis reception. You'd have a lot of folks in the community, but also a lot of allies like myself who might want to come in to see how you guys are doing. And what's the message that you'd like to send for allies, people who may not know really how to help, or you know, any helpful hints, anything that you would like to point out, maybe things you saw that were just really effective, or maybe things you saw that were well-meaning that you'd like to counsel people against. I'm sure you've got a lot of stories, and we probably don't have time to go through all of them, but just whatever you'd like to share to the group that you think would be interesting. And so let's go in reverse order where we answered last time. So I'm going to come right back to you, Sim.
You know, it's hard to say, but I think a couple things that are good are, you know, come to the Coriolis events, just show up. And you don't have to be part of the LGBTQ plus community to show up to the events. You can show up. I know a number of allies who do come to those events, and that's really great. And it makes me feel supported. It just makes me feel good that there's people at these events that that I know that I can support, that aren't afraid to be seen as allies of the community, and that's really, really helpful.
Carol?
Yeah, I agree. You know, Coriolis events are explicitly open to allies, and so absolutely, please show up, come and show your support. And if there are events that are not specifically open to allies, be careful not to take up space. I think that that's one place where I really struggle with a lot of allies, is that, you know, we have these spaces that are safe spaces for the queer community where we can be ourselves, and we don't have to think about ways in which we're being observed, you know, in the goldfish bowl by the straight people. And when we end up in those spaces and all the straight people are so eager to show support and to rally and be there, and then we don't have a place to go and have a drink, you know, it's like, oh, okay, fine. It happens a lot in gay bars, right? You get flooded by allies, and all of a sudden you no longer have a gay bar, you have a rainbow bar full of straight people, right? And so just being aware of that and trying not to take up space. Don't speak for us, but, you know, make sure that you are standing up. Give us a chance to respond first, and if we don't, please do stand up. Be an upstander, be a bystander, but don't speak for us if we're ready to be there and speak for ourselves. I think are the two things I would mention as, you know, just tone it down a little. In terms of support, you know, I like what Alex said earlier about normalizing the use of pronouns, and I would also say be careful not to force them, because what you never ever want to do is force people to either out themselves or to have to lie because they don't feel comfortable outing themselves. And so I think there's a balance to be struck there as well, of making it so it is safe to use pronouns and also not forcing people to do that.
Okay. So Alex, what do you think? You have any additional ones to talk about, off the top of your head?
Just with pronouns, like if it's somebody that you're more friends with type of thingy, to build on what Carolyn was saying, is ask who they might be out to, or who knows like their preferred pronouns, or the pronouns that they go by. That's probably the best thing to do, is not try to out somebody out in public beforehand before you go out to new friends or out to other places. Find out exactly who they're out to. If they're out to other family, if they're out to everybody, and that's overall, not just pronouns, even in like sexualities and genders and like that. I'll follow that as well. And back to you, Mike.
Thanks. Last word on this topic, Tevin, before we move on.
Yeah, I sort of agree with everybody, especially when Carolyn mentioned the whole notion of going into a bar and the gay bar, the straight bar, the lesbian bar, whatever might be taken over by someone who that space was not traditionally invented for. So go into those spaces with the mindset of wanting to ask questions, and not just ask questions just to ask them, but ask questions to understand, be it at a bar, be it at a Coriolis event or an AMS event. And then I would also say, don't assume we've all had the same struggle or the same trials or the same backstory. You know, just because I'm gay doesn't mean my coming out was, you know, far more difficult than someone else's. Our journeys are all unique, and I don't necessarily think assuming someone's journey was hard is very inviting, especially when, you know, now they want to answer it in the opposite case. Maybe they had, you know, welcoming parents and loving parents who totally understood and who totally knew since day one and was like, yeah, like come out, that's totally what you should do. Like, so yeah, don't assume we have the same backstory.
Right. All right, so we have one in the chat, and I'm going to turn to Carolyn to start with, because she already mentioned one of, I think maybe maybe the only one of you that is a parent right now. So this is really about structural barriers. And so whether it's health insurance, parental leave, et cetera, and I'd like you to talk, you know, maybe compare and contrast the structural barriers that you feel you see as part of the LGBT community versus, let's say, parents may, you know, just, you know, parents in the straight community would face, because obviously there's a barrier for childcare. How is it different for you, Carolyn, and what would you think we should know about that?
You know, this is a hard question, Mike, because UCAR is so good at this. So
yeah.
I have not faced pretty much any structural barriers, you know, being queer at UCAR. We have parental leave across the board. We have health insurance for same-sex couples across the board. You know, actually, since 1982, 1992, UCAR has had equal health insurance across the board for same-sex couples and supporting spouses or partners. And so it's been pretty phenomenal. One thing I will say, though, that I know comes up a lot, especially in regards to parenting, is that piece about getting pregnant in the first place. You know, there's a lot of health insurance plans that you have to prove that you're infertile before they will give you fertility treatments. Now, given that I have not slept with a man since I was, I don't know, 20 maybe, there was no way for me to prove that I, you know, wasn't physically capable of conceiving, and in fact I obviously was, because I was able to get pregnant first try. But that coding of that into the health insurance was tricky, and there was a possibility at one point the health insurance would not cover it because I was not proven to have a problem getting pregnant. Now, as it happens, UCAR's health insurance is fantastic, and they just, you know, dealt with it and it was all fine. But there are lots of things like that that come up, and especially around trans issues as well. I know that one of our plans at UCAR does support gender confirmation surgery, and one doesn't at the moment. And so thinking about, you know, how you have to have your healthcare set up in order to make sure that you get everything you need covered as a queer person, I think is a real thing that straight people just don't have to think about. Right. You know, but yeah, making sure again that one advice I would give people who are trans, who are thinking about gender confirmation surgery, who are thinking about, you know, going to work at a new place, you know, check their health insurance for that. Make sure that's included. Check what their policies are about name changes and about pronoun changes, about gender changes, because I think most of the structural barriers these days do tend to revolve around trans folks rather than just gay folks. People seem to have got on board with the gay thing, but not so much with the trans thing so far. And there's a lot of structural barriers that exist still for trans people that we need to get around and we need to keep working on. And that, you know, in some cases is an organizational thing. UCAR has some control over that. And at the same time, we don't have a lot of control over what our health insurance options do offer on some of these things. And you know, the only way that we can deal with that is to go with a different health insurance company, right? The options aren't always there. So yeah, just being aware of that. If you are looking for a new job, make sure you get all that information from HR before you accept the position, so that you know you're going to get covered.
That was very good, Carolyn. Pretty thorough. Any of the other three of you like to make an add or a little bit of a different point? All right, we got plenty of talk about here. I'm looking in the chat. I'm not seeing another question right now, so I'm armed and dangerous with a few more. So really, I think one of the things, let's talk some personal stories here. I'd be really interested to hear sort of some unique things that you've all gone through that, you know, to get to the point of this is not a monolithic community. It's very diverse. So we can talk about your experiences and whatever you want to talk about. This is kind of like a wild card, you know, kind of you pick them, if you will. So, but based on our dry run, though, there is one thing I'd like your perspective, Sam, as to, you mentioned before that you were out and active in the community back at Penn State back in the 80s. So you've got a pretty long, you know, a long period of time there. What have you noticed and that has changed really? I'm sure there's lots that have changed over those decades. And so I think some people who just watch things on TV thinks, well, we passed a law and gay marriage is legal, so hey, what's the problem? There's nothing left to do. Obviously not the case. So if you would talk about what you think has changed for the better and where you think your experiences are still more to go, and then we can ask a slightly different question of the other folks.
Yeah, when I started in my current workplace, I was the only out gay person. I sort of knew that there were other, you know, gay people, LGBT people in our laboratory, but they avoided me because they didn't want to be associated with me at the time. You know, and that was very isolating. And it wasn't until just the last few years that there have been other openly gay people at our laboratory, and now our laboratory director is an openly gay person, so that helps quite a bit. But just all the years of isolation can take a toll You know, back in the mid to late 1980s, one of my coworkers passed away from AIDS. He was a gay man, but we never talked about it because he was never comfortable talking about it. And, you know, maybe he didn't sense that I was necessarily comfortable about it either. I don't know. It was a long time ago. But, you know, it's just dispiriting that there was a lot of that going on over the years, and it's a lot better now. We have a whole bunch of openly gay co-workers in my lab and colleagues, and some of them are here, and it's you know, great to see it, and it's great to see all the changes that have happened over the years.
Thanks. Really appreciate that. So let's back to you, Carolyn. I got a couple of new ones in the chat, but I would like to still go through this thread of you know, really just, you know, looking at the diversity across this panel, and maybe is there just anything that you'd like to share with us that hasn't been covered yet, that you feel that would be interesting for colleagues in the community, but also those of us as allies who, you know,
I think the interesting thing that I find is there's not a lot of out and out homophobia that happens anymore. Mostly it's microaggressions that tend to happen. And so there'll be things like people making assumptions about your partner's gender, or people just not quite getting. I mean, I remember when I first arrived at NCAR, I've been here, what, 7 years now, but you know, somebody told me that after I come out of giving a presentation, that somebody who's quite high up in the organization has said, you know what, I really, really respect her abilities, I just don't agree with her lifestyle. I'm like, what the heck has that got to do with anything, you know? So it's strange things like that, you know, it's not out and out. I mean, it is out and out homophobia, but it's not, you know, it's not necessarily detrimental to me, but it is just little things that get dropped in that feel quite invalidating and make you sit there and, you know, think and think and think. And, you know, I think that's true about all kinds of diversity, you know, whether it's, you know, racial microaggressions, whether it's gendered microaggressions, you know, all those things, just that extra layer of, wow, hang on a minute, was that homophobic? Oh, was that racist? Or was that sexist? You know, just that extra processing time that needs to happen that takes away from actually doing your job. And it just is constant, and you don't necessarily hear it every day. At least at UCAR, we don't hear it every day, especially around queer issues. But I know that there is definitely that stuff that happens out in the community, and people do still hear that stuff every day, and it constantly chips away. You know, there are still people at UCAR who don't feel comfortable coming out, and I'm really sad about that, because I think actually for the most part, UCAR is a very welcoming, affirming, and welcoming place. And I also know that it very much depends on the little work group in which you are embedded, and maybe that particular work group isn't as affirming and welcoming and inclusive as it could be. So that's all work we've got to do.
well, certainly they say all politics is local. So there's also, you know, if you could have a great big organization, but you know, if your one individual office is an issue, and it's your life isn't going to be good. But talk a little bit more about that, Carol, because you did come to us. We're trying to convert you from astrophysics into our atmospheric sciences world here. So you've seen, you know, our common thread. One of our common threads here, as I mentioned before, is that we're AMS members. But you've been in other STEM fields as well and interacted with a lot of different folks. Have you seen any significant differences that are noteworthy, I guess, between some of the other STEM fields that you've interacted with and our, you know, meteorology-centric atmospheric sciences kind of base?
Not huge differences, to be honest with you. I mean, the AAS, which is the American Astronomical Society, was I wouldn't say the AAS was doing a great job. The people within the AAS were doing a great job. The AAS in many ways got in the way of the people doing the great job. It's hard for me to tell, honestly, Mike, because my time in that community was 8 years ago, which was a long time ago in terms of all the social justice transformations that have happened since then. And from what I hear, you know, astronomy is doing better than it was, probably about as well as meteorology is doing, which is, you know, trying to get there, still not doing great, but it's trying to get there and trying to make change. Again, I think we're doing probably better on queer issues than we are on racial issues, for example, but those conversations are now starting to happen. And I am delighted to see that these conversations are happening now, especially around racial justice, to try and, push that conversation forward and to make change. Long way to go, though. There's a lot of folks who just need to really start digging in. And I think that one of the really interesting issues with scientists is that we're very used to being experts, right? We're very used to knowing everything about our subject. And all of a sudden we have this whole thing coming in about social justice. And all of a sudden we're not experts anymore because we're dominant identity people. And it's like, well, we're caught on the back foot a little bit. And that's scary to people. It's scary to suddenly find that you don't know everything and you're going to make mistakes and you're not the expert in the room. And I think getting over that fear is one of the most important things that we can do. So those of us in dominant identities, making sure that we hold the hands of those who are also in dominant identities, so that people in those minoritized identities don't have to do that work. But yeah, just trying to bring everybody along. I really appreciated somebody, a black friend of mine, saying that it's really about no white person left behind. And it's like, yeah, it really is, about how can those white people bring along other white people? How can straight people bring along other straight people into allyship for queer folks, and just try and do the work all together without shaming people.
Well, since you just speak a little bit about racial justice, let's pivot to Tevin, because you did kick off this when your introduction of the intersection between, I think you talked about it during our dry run of, I have to use what's the old thing from Seinfeld, George Costanza, worlds colliding. You mentioned there's a black group and then there's the gay group, and sometimes there's interesting dynamics between the two. Is there any interesting stories or any insights you'd like to share with us?
Let's see. I'll try to figure out how I can quickly summarize this, but to go back to Carolyn's point of allyship and what it truly means to be an ally for all and not just for one. This past year has been trying for a lot of us, obviously, specifically for Black people, especially as it pertains to George Floyd's death and Breonna Taylor as well. It's very unfortunate that people have to die for these issues and these questions to arise. And then all of a sudden, oh yes, let's talk about social injustices and how we can make them right. And I don't really know of where the answer lies. I mean, if you look to the origins of what our country was founded upon, it's very easy to point and say, well, we were a country that was formed on the backs of racists. However, it's not as apparent when it comes to gender identity issues and LGBTQIA issues, because we all probably know someone that's gay or someone that's trans or someone that identifies as queer. But when it comes to, our family members, in a very generic sense, I'm from a Black family and you're from a white family. And so you don't necessarily know how to cross those lines, even at least from what I've seen, people aren't necessarily able to identify and say, oh, well, I know that person because that's my family member or that's my relative. So I don't necessarily know how we can get past it other than to just support one another, support those that don't have a voice at the table. And if they don't have a seat at the table or a voice at the table, pull them up a chair and give them a megaphone. And it shouldn't be as much of a fight as it is for Black queer issues to be at the forefront. Black Lives Matter, or BLM, has been a statement that has been echoed more so now than ever before, but I don't know if it carries the same weight or if it carries that same meaning, or is this just the topic that a lot of people feel like is cool right now, so let's talk about it, and then we're not going to actually put any action behind it. And I don't want to steal another question, but to get to Maddie Nisnek's question about, and I'll read it to you. Maddie says, I try to be visible at work, on social media, et cetera, to help others see there are LGBTQIA people in meteorology and science and feel less alone. But I also fear becoming the LGBTQIA people know, or person people know, and the rest of my identity might get overshadowed. Is there any advice to finding a balance or striking a balance? And Maddie, to you, I would say you have to be an advocate for yourself, because you can be your best advocate for yourself. What persona do you want to put out to people? I work in a very transparent industry. I'm on TV every single day. And so the one thing that people see is I am Black. They don't necessarily know that I identify as gay. So what I've had to do is occasionally remind people that I'm Black for those that didn't notice. But in terms of visibility, I wear this bracelet every single day in every single broadcast. And that's not me, touting my gayness. That's here to say, I am here and I want other people to know that they can be on the stage as well and they are being seen. And so I can kind of control to some extent what persona I put out to people. That being said, it's up to the viewer, or it's up to my colleagues and my coworkers and my bosses and AMS to receive both of those personas. See me as a scientist, but also see me as a Black queer scientist. So I hope in terms of balance, you understand that not one part is more than the other and they're all equal parts. And it's up to you to put a little dash of this or that of whatever is not being showcased or shown to folks.
Thanks so much. That's really good perspective. So I'd like to turn it over to Alex. This is kind of like whatever you want to talk about. Any other additional things you'd like to provide perspective on?
I was like, it was pretty much well covered by the other panelists pretty well. The only advice is from if there's any buddy in college and stuff currently, if you can come out sooner to your extended family, do not wait till 2 weeks before graduation, because that was a very interesting period. At least it went well. Yeah, just don't wait till the last minute for that. But yeah, I Carolyn and Tevin really hit up on the main points, so they did a good job. So that's good. We can go back to Mike.
Thanks, I really appreciate it. Tevin, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add another point. When we talk about being an ally and what everyone in the community can do to become a better ally, in terms of giving one another a voice, we have, of course, Black History Month, which is in February. We have Pride Month, which is right now in the month of June. It shouldn't take a month for someone to be recognized, right? We should be an ally for all people, no matter the time of year, no matter the day, no matter the hour. And it's easy to do when you have a month, and I am so grateful for both of those months. However, it would be a lot less awkward if, in December on Christmas Day, we also reached out to queer folk and we're like, hey, I see you're queer. How can I assist you? How can I better be here for you? Because at the end of the day, we all want to be friends with one another and address a situation how you would with any other friend.
Yeah. All right, well, we're coming closer to the end. We've got just a few more minutes before we're going to do the breakout groups. I want to give everybody an opportunity out there who's on to please have one last shot at submitting a question. And while we're hanging on there, I will ask one more to be by just to give you another opportunity to add in. But it's something that was said by Tevin that really intrigued me a little bit. And it's actually came up. We have at my National Weather Service office. We have had these inclusivity talks. It started with people really wanting to be heard and talk to each other after George Floyd's death, but we've decided to continue them. And this last one, being Pride Month, we engaged quite a bit of our LGBT workforce, many of whom were very forthcoming and had a lot of allies on the line as well. And I'm not going to say who it is, but I'll just say that one of our Black colleagues said to one of the LGBT folks, so we're making some kind of discussions, and he said, well, when you walk into a room and you're an LGBT person, you may not know but when I walk into a room, people know I'm Black. So part of it is recognition. But so we're talking about Pride Month is some people choose that actually some of the folks on our weather service call talked about that it's something that's private to me. I'm not I'm perfectly open, but I don't walk up and put it on my business card. I deal like any other meteorologist And it's not really something that I bring to work and make a big deal of, but I don't hide it either. So that's one kind of that balance. I'm interested from some of you that not wanting to be seen first as what your identity group is, but want to be seen first as a peer. We're here in the meteorology section. I'm a meteorologist. I'm also this sex or gender, this sexual orientation, this race, whatever. But not one of those things doesn't define me. I'm a collection of all of them. So is there any thoughts there that comes to mind for any of you that on how you handle that, lessons you've learned?
I'm older than the other panelists, and when I was younger, I also feared being the gay person, the one that was gay, and that's all everybody saw. And when that question was asked, I'm thinking now, it's like at this point I just don't think about it anymore. I'm just trying to be myself. There's a point where it just sort of disappears. And, I don't know if that's a natural progression of aging, but, I worry less about, how other people are, viewing me than just, being myself. And, everybody at work knows me, and it just turns out that my husband also works at our lab in a different division. So, everybody knows that we're a couple. How people view us, I don't know. And, I don't necessarily care. I just, hope that I'm there and, we get included in everything and we have a sense of belonging, which I feel I do at the lab. And that's what's really important to me.
Thanks, Sam. Anyone else like to jump in on that?
I tend to agree with that, Sim, in that, my gay identity used to be very, very salient. It was the thing that I felt defined me for a long time. I went through that pride stage of coming out, of dripping in rainbows, and God forbid that anybody would, mistake me as straight, they would get an earful. I am very deliberate about being out at work because of my position partially, but also making sure that people know that it is safe to be out and that it is okay, and they have role models. And actually, we are really, queer people are very overrepresented in UCAR leadership. I'll say that. We have a lot of queer people near the top of leadership. But I agree with you, Sim. My queer identity has kind of faded into the background quite a lot. It's not as salient as it used to be. My identity as a parent has massively increased in salience because that's the thing that defines a lot of the things that I can do these days, and I think that it is a natural progression of assimilating your queer identity into the rest of you. I think that's part of the natural progression. But yeah, I think it's also part of the fact that we're not as oppressed as we used to be. And therefore, it's not something that's up for me every day because I'm not seeing the oppression every single day. So I wonder how that ties in with people who still are experiencing that oppression every single day on their day-to-day basis.
Any last thoughts from Tevin or Alex before we pivot to the working groups? Not the working groups, the breakout sessions. We're not working. It's not a working. It's just breakouts.
I would just say, we have to remember, and this goes for all, I think, that in my experiences, just to sort of piggyback off of Carolyn, being, and I don't want to say I'm oppressed, but as a person of color, this is what you see. This is what you see when I walk in the room. That's the first thing you see before I speak, before I, hand gesture, before I show you my wealth of knowledge from all of my degrees and whatnot and my certifications and stuff. What you see is someone that's Black. And so for me, it's a little bit different in that I want my Blackness, but I want my queerness, but I want my intellect. Because so much of that gets overlooked just because I'm Black. So I feel like I have to level up some of the other stuff just to meet everything else, or drop some other things down. And I'm not saying I tone myself down, because I don't, or I try not to at the very least, but I know personally of a few people that are Black that have to also remind that, yes, I'm queer, so I can speak to queer issues as well. Or yes, I'm a scientist, so I can speak to scientists as well. I'm not just some Black person that you have a stereotype in your mind of, especially in a field that's so underrepresented anyway with Black Americans or Black scientists.
Thanks, Tevin. All right, Alex. Not required, but you get the last word here before we move on to the breakouts.
I was like, it was pretty much well covered. Basically, just be polite, be nice to other people, be respectful of other people's different identities, not just within the LGBTQ community, but anything that cross-reference, get more informed, and yeah. And thank you all for being a part of this today. Back to Mike.
All right, thanks, Alex. So I'd like to thank Alex, Tevin, Carolyn, and Sim for really an engaging panel discussion. In this series of webinars sponsored by BRAID, this one in celebration of Pride Month. Also thanks Joe for running the background, and certainly for Gage for setting this up. So I want to thank all of you. This has been really good. And it's been my honor to talk with you, and look forward to hopefully seeing you all in person in Houston. Keep our fingers crossed on that Delta variant that doesn't really, but we'll see. Anyway, with that, I think this is a good time to turn it back over to Joe and Gage so we can give the instructions on how we're going to transition to the breakouts. Thank you again.